It is clear from the scenario that there are a number of factors that negatively affect Nick's performances in the sport of badminton, causing him to play to a much lower standard than his ability would suggest. One reason for this may be related to the stress which was described by Lazarus in 1991 as an imbalance between the demands of the situation and how a person perceives their ability to complete it. This suggests that if an athlete believes they are incapable of meeting the demands of the game, they'll begin to become stressed and as a result play worse. In this case, Nick may perhaps feel he is unable to return the serve of his opponent, even if he has practiced enough to be able to, causing stress to build up. Although in some cases stress can be beneficial for the athlete, it can be interpreted that in this case it is surpass use stress, in which an athlete performs at the highest level due to having enough stress to concentrate, challenge and motivate them, and instead become distress, where the athlete becomes overwhelmed with the stress produced. This can be seen at the far right end of the graph above, which symbolises how after a point, stress becomes a negative factor in performance, which is likely what Nick experiences, as we know the coach believes he should be doing really well for the college, but is not. As a result of this, Nick is likely to receive many of the symptoms of stress during his game, both somatic and cognitive. Somatic symptoms are physical changes that will occur inside Nick, such as an increased heart rate or blood pressure. If he perceives these in the wrong way, it could also lead to a higher arousal, however we can go on to that later. Another somatic symptom may be increased muscle tension, which could be detrimental to his performances, as the muscles may take longer to react to stimuli like the shuttlecock, as they are tense, making him less able to return the shot, perhaps costing him the game. Furthermore, this increases the chance of injury, as it can cause joint pain, which would also contribute to his poor performance. On the other hand, he would also be experiencing cognitive symptoms, like becoming less concentrated and less able to make decisions, for example, what technique he should use to return the shot. This would cost Nick valuable seconds, and may cause him to produce the wrong type of shot or miss the shuttlecock completely. Although less likely to affect Nick, he may also experience behavioural symptoms outside of the sport, leading him to poor eating habits which could affect attributes like his stamina in the long term. These are all part of the process of stress. It initially begins with a demand, which can be numerous stresses ranging from the sport environment, like the pressure and audience, to the internal stresses like the lack of sleep or perception of ability. For example, if the crowd had come to watch Nick, stress may rise as there is a high pressure for him to win, as everyone is watching. However, in this case, I believe one of the main causes of stress may arise from the coach, as we know he says how good he is and how well he should be doing. Furthermore, we can also see that Nick is stressed through exams, also, which may also have an effect on the sport, as they may be less concentrated on the game, as he may be stressing about the exam. He could also be stressed over both, causing him to have very high levels of stress within the game, which can be seen through the graph, is not good. It is likely Nick then perceives he does not have the ability to do well as the coach expects, and views it as a threat, which is stage 2. In stage 3, this stress becomes distress, causing Nick to become vulnerable to the symptoms, like less concentrated and focused. Finally, in stage 4, these symptoms have an effect on performance, causing him to react slower to shots and become unable to make it to others. Another possible factor causing Nick to perform worse than expected may be to do with his anxiety. It was stated by Bucksworth and Dishman in 2002 that anxiety is a negative state of worry that occurs in absence of real danger and is associated with arousal. Similarly to stress, this suggests that it occurs because the athlete doubts their ability to cope with their situations. However, anxiety is a reaction to something that may happen at a later date. This can also occur through stress if the changes are perceived in a negative sense. There is almost 2 types of anxiety, trait and state. And from Nick's scenario, it can be suggested that he has high levels of trait anxiety. This is due to his likelihood to worry in a variety of situations, as not only is he anxious about the up-and-coming game, but also future exams. Trait anxiety suggests that this proneness to worry is unlikely to change over time, implying that even with techniques Nick has learnt, it is likely he will always become anxious. In addition to this, his trait anxiety and a high arousal could also lead him to have high state anxiety that he would feel just before a game or during a game. Nick becoming nauseous is likely to be a result of this. Similarly to stress, there is both cognitive and somatic anxiety, that cause changes and ultimately negatively affect a player's performance. Once again, cognitive anxiety is the psychological state of anxiety brought on through an athlete's fear that they might play badly. McNally said in 2002 that cognitive anxiety is the negative expectations and concerns about the ability to perform and the consequences that could come from it. This suggests that worrying and overthinking about the outcome of the match raises one's anxiety and causes them to play worse. It can be seen in the graph above that cognitive anxiety is likely to be extremely high even a week before the competition until it begins. Until a week high even a week before the competition even begins, and will fluctuate depending on how the game is going. On the other hand, somatic anxiety is very low until a few hours before competition, where there is a steep rise. This is because it's a physical component caused through cognitive anxiety, like increased heart rate or an increased blood pressure. However, it is how the athlete perceives these changes. For example, a professional or an athlete with low trait anxiety may perceive these physical changes as a positive thing, and therefore use it to their advantage. For example, become more alert and concentrated, allowing them to react faster to shots and return them. However, if perceived badly, like in this case, it can cause Nick to become more anxious and nervous, and ultimately become less concentrated, leading him to missing more shots, as he may have a wide attention field. There are many factors affecting anxiety that can occur before or during a competition. For example, before the competition, which can be seen in Nick's case, he may have a fear of a bad performance, or perhaps a fear of injury, causing him to become anxious and therefore play worse. Anxiety can also be affected during a game, through the time left of the scoreline, as the game continues. If Nick is losing, he may become more anxious, as the pressure is placed on him, causing an even more increased heart rate, which he is likely to perceive in a negative manner. Arousal could also be affecting Nick's performances, as it is the physiological state of alertness that prepares an athlete to perform during a competition. Weinberg and Gold defined arousal in 2007 as a blend of physiological and psychological activity, referring to the level of alertness and motivation in a particular moment, in this case again. There are many different theories of arousal that attempt to explain how levels of arousal affect performance. For example, in Nick's case, the catastrophe theory is well suited, as it helps illustrate how his performance falls apart after making a mistake, which the inverted U theory does not account for. This theory also explains how cognitive and somatic anxiety may affect Nick's performance. For example, the inverted U theory may work if a person has low cognitive anxiety, as it is then only arousal affecting performance, allowing a gradual increase or decrease depending on the levels of anxiety. However, if an athlete like Nick has high cognitive anxiety accompanied with high arousal, it can result in a catastrophic drop in performance, as opposed to a gradual, as we have seen from this scenario. If then Nick was able to lower his cognitive anxiety, he may be able to reduce his arousal and return to a better performance. For example, Nick may begin the game well, despite feeling slightly nauseous, as his arousal levels may be at the optimal level for his performance. This would result in him using the techniques he's learnt effectively to return shots and win points, as he is at his optimal arousal. At this point, he would have high concentration and would be selectively attending the most important cues that allow him to return shots in areas difficult for the opponent. However, if the other player then began winning points, Nick may begin to become overly anxious and begin overthinking thoughts inside his head, leading to a sharp decrease in arousal, followed by a dramatic dip in performance. On the other hand, this scenario does not support the drive theory in numerous ways, as it suggests that arousal is directly proportional to performance, which it clearly isn't. I accidentally skipped a line on catastrophe theory quick, so the catastrophe theory also says Nick can then return to a better performance if he is able to reduce his arousal and return to his optimal level. On the other hand, this scenario does not support the drive theory in numerous ways, as it suggests that arousal is directly proportional to performance, which it clearly isn't in this case. In Nick's case, this would suggest that his arousal rises. As his arousal rises, he would begin to perform his dominant habit, and his performance would rise, suggesting that perhaps he is reacting quicker to shots and using the techniques he has learnt to return them. However, one criticism of this is that if his dominant habit was learnt incorrectly, he would actually perform worse, which may be true in this case, as he is in the stages of learning new strategies and often struggles hitting the more precise shots. In addition to this, he is not a professional in any way. In addition to this, as he is not a professional, it may not be an advantage to have high arousal, as he may be unable to control it and become overwhelmed.